I think at this point, we're going to start our webinar. Please know that right now, all of the participant lines will be muted. And many of you have already signed in with the name of your parent center and your state, and we welcome you to our webinar today. Just a couple of reminders in terms of webinar etiquette. Right now, all the lines are muted. If you have a question or a comment, please use the chat box. It's very helpful if you use the chat box, because that way we can keep a record of the questions that are asked and the comments, and we'll be able to make sure that even if for some reason we don't cover them during the webinar, we can get those responses out to everybody. If you would like to ask a question or share a comment, there's a little icon in the toolbar at the top of your screen, and it's a person with their hand up, and you can just click on the down arrow there, and you can raise your hand, or you can say, I can't hear very well, or you could say, I agree or disagree, slow down, speed up, and you can actually register your applause in that little spot as well. So for today, we are going to be talking about alternate assessments, and these are alternate assessments for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and as ways to measure their the extent to which they are learning and being instructed in the common what we call the college and career ready standards that most states have adopted. In some states, it may be called the Common Core State Standards. It may be called Core Content Standards. Each state has made decisions about how they will meet those requirements from the U.S. Department of Ed in terms of college and career readiness standards. So we're going to start off today with a presentation by Mary LaCorte. She's going to just sort of give us a little overview and just help us to focus on the alternate assessments in general. And then we'll hear from individuals representing two of the organizations who are funded by the U.S. Department of Education to develop alternate assessments. And these alternate assessments, and they'll tell you more about them later, but these are alternate assessments that many states are adopting for use within their state. And then there are, of course, some states who are developing their own alternate assessments. So with that, let me introduce Mary LaCorte. And many of you are familiar with Mary and know Mary. She's Assistant Director at ECAC, Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, and she is the Director of North Carolina's Parent Training and Information Center. So welcome, Mary, and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Oh, for a second, I almost forgot to unmute. Well, thanks, everybody. This is kind of fun to be on this with you. Most of you are going to learn some great things from the other two presenters. My part is just a very, very brief overview of alternate assessments. And it is indeed that, just a very brief overview. As you get into a bigger discussion, you'll have more information. So, in both IDEA 97 and in 04, there was a big shift to the fact that all children, including those children with the most significant disabilities, being included in statewide testing programs. One of the big challenges during that time was, for parent centers anyway, and so I'm talking from that parent center perspective, was it was such a different, it was a whole shift in paradigm of thinking that students with significant cognitive disabilities would be learning a lot more, are being exposed to a lot more other than more functional type curriculums. So this was huge. We got a lot of calls, and a lot of those calls from parents saying, my child has significant disabilities. This is absurd. Why should they be exposed to what the other students are learning, and why do they have to be tested? And what we knew is that teachers were always also confused because they may not have had a lot of background in finding ways to address and to provide opportunities for these students to learn things that we would more consider academics and the standard course of study, et cetera. So there was a lot of confusion, not necessarily fewer or more teachers wanting to do this, because I think teachers have always wanted to educate students. It was more a big shift to now the responsibility falling to the districts and the state educational agency to figure out how, and to figure out how to develop and help teachers develop ways to, in meaningful ways, teach and assess academic skills. So you have first the children who had not been previously exposed, and I can tell you that because I'm a mom of a young woman who did not have exposure to more academic type studies, or at least what the other students were learning. And so not only providing that access, but meaningful ways to teach it and assess it. So those were very difficult things for a lot of folks to grasp. But the good news is we've come a long way now, and now, of course, with OSEP's huge emphasis, as it should be, on student outcomes, this is really getting us to where we need to be going. So of course, alternate assessments are now, of course, aligned to North Carolina. We're calling it the standard course of study. It is college and career ready. But one of the things that's important to remember is, although students are being exposed to the full course of study, it doesn't mean that we're leaving functional skills out. Functional skills are still critical for all students, and especially those with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So functional. In 97 and early on and just past that, everything was more about a portfolio. And the teachers, by and large, kind of selected what was being used in the portfolio, but that was kind of the way to demonstrate or to assess where a student was performing. The performance now has really shifted to more a task, and it's on demand. So teaching the information in a variety of ways, in meaningful ways, and then trying to assess what the student is really grasping and holding on to. So now we're talking about this alternate means of assessment. It's an alternate achievement standard, but it's not such an alternate curriculum because it's so aligned to the standard course of study. So, and I think those pieces are certainly nothing that's probably new to folks, but that's kind of that broad stroke of alternate assessments. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how well you can see this. I was trying. This is basically in North Carolina what we've had for a long time, and which has been fabulous, is that our state has worked very hard to even like 6-7 years ago to look at those common state standards and to kind of cull out the essence of what those objectives were and what those standards would be. The students should be able to do this by the end of the school year. And then to kind of, make a kind of this link across into what might be the extended state standards. So we call them extended state standards. And what that really looks for is how we're going to find access along the same kinds of things that are being taught and expected to be learned for a student who doesn't learn in a typical way. So one thing you might see on the left side in that key idea, and things are clustered as you can see, you might have prompting and support to ask and answer questions about key details in a text. The way it might go across would be some of the same kinds of skills. So we're looking for skills here, is answering questions about key details in a familiar story. Keywords there, familiar stories. So the student's not being expected necessarily to read the text, but being expected to understand ideas and about key details in familiar stories. So you can kind of see how it goes. One of the next cool things that has been going on, and it's kind of a guidance piece, is looking at how we're going to unpack those. So how are we going to help teachers use this information, and hopefully ultimately how we're going to help families from a parent-centered perspective learn how to do this. And so they've kind of culled it down and given folks the big idea. So it's like, what does the story tell me? Do I remember the important details? If I don't remember, what can I do? And then, of course, you can read all of these. You don't need me to read them to you. But in looking across those, there's also got to be a way to score how a student's doing. You know, it can't be yes, no. And we're all about everything that this is designed to address also is to improve outcomes for students. So it's not just to, you know, so you get a score, a number. In North Carolina, now we're using kind of a 1 through 5 rating system for all students, not just students with significant disabilities. So what you'd want to see is like then they'll say, how do you know? How do you know this child's making progress? And what's the pace of that progress? What needs to go, you know, we need to go back and look more. So there's a lot of guidance on our Department of Public Instruction's website. There's a ton of tools for teachers and classroom assistants and other folks who are working with students to really understand what's going on. One of the next things they kind of pair up, and I was actually having a hard time finding matching the kindergarten with the third grade. So this piece here is just a little teeny snapshot out of a multi-page piece for this grade. And then, so teachers are actually able to score. And if you kind of look across, this is for a slightly older child, but where they can answer, and of course remembering, answering, you know, we're using a variety of communication styles, both expressive and receptive. We're looking at a lot of things, and there's lots of prompts available, those kinds of things. But this actually, that piece of that reading curriculum has a 33% piece of their score. So this is very, very well thought out. It's well designed, and it's intended to really show specific progress. In North Carolina, we've worked with our state improvement project for a number of years, and one of the big pieces about doing that is helping everyone be on the same page with language and vocabulary. And I don't mean as it relates to a curriculum, but meaning when we're having a conversation about, for instance, actually reading or literacy, we're talking about fluency and lots of things like that. But we want not only the teachers, the other people who are interacting with the child, the family, to all kind of understand those things. When we look at all those things together, that's where then we know what that progress might look like for that child. So if we're all kind of talking the same language. So one of the things that ECAC has done, and I'm sure many of you who are working in parent centers of whether you're the statewide parent center or you're the community parent resource center, working with, you know, to locate, find, develop, fine-tune, tweak any of your tools that help families and educators come together and work together. We've done that on our SIP projects, and that helps. And so some of the questions that we talk about with families when we're explaining and talking to about alternate assessments, and really any kind of assessments, because these questions are not reserved solely for children always with the most significant, but these are kinds of questions we want families to be as engaged and involved in their child's education, especially it relates to this academic piece, as they are with the functional piece. And so these kinds of questions, you know, most families are very concerned about, with a child with severe or complex disabilities, how are you going to be accurately able to assess what he or she can do? How are you going to know these things? And so when that data is being taken and those kinds of things, the teachers may be very well versed. They talk their own language the same way many of us in parent centers do, but we really need to be able to share that language with families. And so helping families, they don't have to know it all, but they need to know the questions to ask, and then they need to be able to work with their child's teacher to know better about what's going on. And so that's kind of our take in a nutshell on alternate assessments, but then, you know, we kind of move past that overview of it to like, what can we do? As parent centers or others working with families, what can we do? And the big thing is helping families to be empowered with the questions, and the more empowered they become and comfortable with the language, that's going to lead to more effective participation in the IEP and team planning process, and ultimately helping to support the child at home, what's being done at school, and the likelihood of then improving results really grows up dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our little part of this. And Deborah, questions at the end? I think so.
Can you hear me, Mary?
Yes, I can.
Yes. If people have questions, we actually do have a couple of minutes. If anyone has a question, you can either type it in the chat box or you can unmute your line using #6.
And if you want to see, if your state's not yet doing a lot of this, or depending if they are and you're involved in helping your state change any of these things in your state, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction website has a lot of tools, and you can see, and it's almost scary, but the testing booklet for students with disabilities is 147 pages long, and I'm not kidding about that. So it's like, it gets kind of complex. But in essence, it should all lead to hopefully improved outcomes and kids learning. That's what it's all about, kids learning and being prepared for a rich and full adult life.
Yes. So I'm sure folks will have questions later. We'll have a couple of opportunities for you to ask questions. Mary, I think that we have really gotten a great overview from you, and particularly with helping us to really think about how we can use information from you and also our presenters in our work in our parent centers. So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your presentation. And we
I'm looking
now
forward to seeing more for the ladies. So.
yeah. And so now we're going to have a presentation from Ricki Sabia. And many of you are familiar with Ricki because she's a longtime advocate. Ricki's an attorney, and she is also has always been very busy in terms of policy advocacy around disability, and especially in the area of education. She is working with the National Center and State Collaborative as their technical assistance and parent training specialist, and she has just joined EdCount as a senior associate. And we're really very happy that Ricki is able to join us and share with us the work that NCSIC is doing on alternate assessment and the wonderful resources that she has created for parents and for parent centers to help us to negotiate through the new alternate assessments. Ricki?
Hello there, everyone. I already have a technical problem, I'm afraid, because the battery in this phone handset is dying, in fact. And if I hang up, I'll have to do the whole thing. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, I can get through my presentation.
Okay.
Doing that. We'll see. I didn't think it would only have 10 minutes on it, but it did. So anyway, thank you for having me here today. I am going to be speaking about the NCSIC project. And there is a lot of information in this. I'm not going to go over everything, but I wanted you to have it available to you. You did hear about the funding for it. We're going to be developing, we have been developing a new alternate assessment in math and English language arts to be completed by the 2014-15 school year, although I should point out that states may have different implementation timelines for the NCSIC assessment themselves. There are 24 states and 5 centers that are working together as part of NCSIC. Also, NCSIC is developing curriculum and instructional resources, which I'll be talking a fair amount about because that's sort of the holy grail for kids with significant cognitive disabilities. And these are based on the Common Core state standards, but can be used in any state. And that is the link to those resources, which can be accessed right now by parents, teachers. They're publicly available for free, whoever. This is a map of the states, and the orange and the blue don't really have much meaning anymore, but they'll give you an idea of who are the NCSIC partners. And at the bottom, if you can see it, are the District of Columbia. There is a consortium of Pacific Islands, and then the U.S. Virgin Islands. the importance of NCSIC resources to parent centers in all the states. There's free online curriculum instruction resources, as I just pointed out. There are also parent resources, which I will talk about, that describe the NCSIC curriculum and instructional resources, the assessment, and other related issues, and we will get into that a little more. And the important thing for parent centers to know is there's much state discretion. So parent centers can use the resources, especially the parent resources, to familiarize themselves with NCSIC, follow up with the state education agency, and provide input on those state decisions. And whether or not you're in a NCSIC state, you can be helping people understand and know about the wiki and the materials there. There's also NCSIC value in states without the Common Core state standards, because the main focus of any sets of academic standards, especially when they're being used for kids who have significant cognitive disabilities, are really very similar. You know, the main essence of, you know, there's always going to be equations, there's going to be elements of fiction. These are common across all the college and career-ready standards. And the NCSIC resources aren't the curriculum. They are models of curriculum and instructional resources that happen to be based on the Common Core. And by curriculum, we don't mean this is a separate curriculum. We just mean they're resources to help educators understand the curriculum and how to use it in terms of students that take alternate assessments. And then these NCSIC resources are very rich for these students, and their usefulness in professional development we feel is valuable in any state. So there's also a lot of talk about college and career readiness these days, and the project went through and looked at college and career ready skills for all students and identified, and these are not all of them, but the most important key ones for students with significant cognitive disabilities: communicative competence, effective communication, regardless of what method you use, and you can see the others. And reading, writing, math aren't the only academic ones, but those are the ones affected by the assessment, so it's pointed out there. So the NCSIC philosophy was not just to design a well-designed state assessment and the formative assessments, but also to provide some other pieces that are important for college, career, and community readiness for this population. And that includes the curricular instructional framework, teacher resources and professional development, and making communicative competence a priority by helping teachers know how to get students to have communicative competence. And I'm just going to quickly go through some of the instructional resources, not all of them, as you will see in a moment. There are a lot of instructional resources, and when you go on the wiki, you can explore this further, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But let it suffice to say that there are the what to teach resources that have to do more with the curriculum piece of it, and then the how to teach. But through all these resources, there are strategies and tools, because you never know what ones somebody may focus on, and you want there to be strategies and helpful information in all of them. So in the quality indicators are to promote the standards, to set high expectations for all students, to apply principles of universal design for learning, and there's a link in here later if you need to know more about universal design for learning, and to apply evidence-based teaching practices for this population. So one key thing about the NCSIC instructional curriculum resources was they looked at a learning progressions framework that's really for all students, and how do all students typically take to make progress in the content areas to get deeper, broader, more sophisticated understanding. And the learning targets that are necessary that represent the essential core concepts in a content area, sometimes called the big ideas. And I noticed that Mary also used that term, big ideas. And they took these learning targets, these big ideas that are in general for all students in math and ELA, and they compared them to the Common Core state standards and looked at what are the big ideas from the Common Core state standards that are needed at each grade to make progress in later grades. And these big ideas were then broken down into smaller, more teachable and accessible segments of the contents called core content connectors. And these core content connectors are the starting point for instruction based on the Common Core state standards. And this is an example of a Common Core state standard with all the different pieces that may be part of it, and then a Common Core connector that breaks out one piece of that. And there will be multiple core content connectors on a particular Common Core state standard. And it's easier to break this down when you're working with students with significant cognitive disabilities into these smaller parts and smaller benchmarks. And there are different CCCs, as we call them, that may be more introductory, that may get more complex, that as students who have had access to all of this from the beginning, from kindergarten, as they get older, they will be accessing CCCs at a higher level, and ones that are first getting this now may be accessing them at a more introductory level. And you could use any kind of oral written response. This is not just answer questions orally. There's any kind of mechanisms that help a student show what they know that are permitted. And one of the other materials that I think will be really helpful, particularly in your work, is instructional families. There are different CCCs that are related to each other are put into families to show how they develop and interact across the grades. So you see what's coming next in the subject areas and the domains across the grade, that particular grade, across all the grades, K-12, and also across a grade span to help you know what's coming next. And this is helpful for teaching, but also for informing standards-based IEP goals when you need to look at what's coming next. And this is an example, and it's very busy and small, but I just wanted to give you an idea across a whole grade span. You could see these three different families that are part of data analysis, and you can see the CCCs for each of the grade and in those families and how they progress through the whole grade span. And not that you would pick out a particular CCC and say, okay, this is the IEP goal or objective, but you would look at the progression and where the student is, and it can help inform IEP goals. And this is an example of an element card, and there are these element cards that have all this information on them for most of the CCCs. There are also blank element cards that teachers can use and make their own, and there will be a part of the wiki where they can upload those for other teachers to use and for parents to see. There's also curriculum resource guides, which provide guidance and sample materials for teaching the content to students with most significant disabilities. They have examples of ways to promote college and career readiness, and there are examples for differentiating instruction for a wide range of students. And I'm going to show you an example of a UDL table. This particular one is for reading informational text, and this slide just gets at the multiple means of representation part. There's multiple means of expression and engagement too in the guides, and there are all examples of strategies for different kinds of needs: sensory needs, physical needs, extremely limited experience, skill, motivation, attention, limited or no speech. Just to give you an idea, there's so much information that's available. There are also universal design for learning units and lessons, and that's the link where you can learn more about UDL. And these are models to help teachers understand how they can create their own lessons from the start for diverse learners. And these are for use in general ed classes as well as special ed classes where there may be a lot of diversity among the learners there. There are also math language activities for scripted systematic instruction called Massies and Lassies. And these are really very good for use with students who have the most needs, because these are very intensive step-by-step instruction on key concepts and symbols that can be used in any educational setting, including gen ed class, to get at particular pieces that have been missing. And these incorporate evidence-based instruction from resource, including faded prompting. There are actual teaching scripts for teachers who may need them, although obviously they don't need to use them if they already know how to do some systematic instruction. And they have graduating levels of difficulty, starting with the very first steps for students who have little or no understanding of the content. So when you put all these instructional resources together, there's a lot of information to meet kids where they are. Professional development in each of the states or communities of practice that receive professional development via resources on webinars, and I give you the link where you can find them publicly available. And states will also have access to interactive professional development modules. Assessments, there will be assessments 3 through 8, and in this project, grade 11 will be the one in high school. And I want to note that some information could change as the pilot testing is completed, but this is where things stand now. There will be approximately 30 items for each subject, and these 30 items will cover approximately 10 of the core content connectors in each subject. Most of them, of the assessment items, will ask students to select the correct response, so it will look very much like a regular test, and there will be items where there will be a constructed response with a lot of leeway as to how to construct that response. The length of the assessment overall will be approximately 1.5 to 2 hours for each assessment, although that can be broken down into smaller time slots over a 2-month testing period. It will be an online testing program, although for students who are not able to interact with the testing program online, the teachers may print out the materials and enter student responses. And I should point out that there are also a lot of formative in-class assessments that are part of the instructional resources. Assessment participation guidelines, these assessments are for kids who have pervasive significant cognitive disability, which means across settings in all subjects. They are supposed to have IEP goals and instruction based on the state standards, and they need extensive, direct, individualized instruction and substantial supports. The IEP team will determine annually whether the student will take the assessment. And these are the parent resources, and this is a link to those parent resources. And these next 2 slides just go through a list of all the different ones that are available. You can see there are multiple ones that describe the project. There is a diagram like you saw in this presentation with a 1-sentence explanation for each of them. There is a more detailed description of the curriculum, instruction, and assessment model. There are alternate assessment FAQs that will go into way more detail than I have today on the alternate assessment, so they're FAQs. Those were based on what NCSIC had provided, and I made them more parent-friendly. Also, I wanted to hear from parents, so I asked a parent who has a child with very significant disabilities and asked her to ask questions which NCSIC answered, so that's available. There is an IEP team guidance for participation in the alternate assessment that is more parent-friendly, and I will get into that particular one in a little more detail. There is a document around college and career readiness. There is one that goes into not just the academic college and career readiness, but other skills that studies have shown are important that should be addressed on IEPs. There is one specifically about communicative competence. There's a newsletter and website information document. There is a discussion points with research, which I find very important because, there's a lot of beliefs on who these kids are. There are myths about them that we want to correct. There is why we hold up these high standards for them. There is issues about their communicative competence, about their medical needs. And so these discussion points lay out all this information, and then combined with that is information that backs up these statements with research studies cited. So you could say, and this is why we believe this, and this is the study that says that. And there's a document about why NCSIC is valuable in states without Common Core state standards. And there are short PowerPoints on a number of these subtopics that you could use to do a presentation. And there's also one that is comprehensive, even more comprehensive than what I have used today. So you could use those as a resource. And this is an example of one of the presentations, and it's the guidance for IEP teams. It is essentially the same guidance that educators receive, but more parent-friendly. It removes some background information that's already in project summaries, and it provides the criteria for participation using the same language, which is so important, as Mary pointed out, using the language that educators will use, but with a sidebar to provide more information so they understand the terms. And I'm going to show you an example of that. And it explains in parentheses some terms in the list of information not to be considered for the assessment decision, for example, education settings, and the FAQs are more parent-focused within there. For example, there's placeholders for information on diploma policies And because in a lot of states, if you take the alternate, you're not going to be getting a diploma, and parents should know this. And also process for disagreeing with IEP team assessment decisions. And all these materials are available to states to use and to send out. Many states, hopefully, will be taking these, putting their state spin on it and using them, but it's important for parent centers to know that they're up on the SNCSIC website in their original form to see how your state is using them and whether some information that you feel is important is missing. And for this final slide, I wanted to show you an example of one of the materials that I was talking about, the participation criteria. And this is a page that has the third criteria with all its complex language, but also on the left is a sidebar that breaks down some of what this means in defining it just a little further to help parents understand what the terms mean. So that is my presentation. I'm sorry I rushed through it a little, just hoping not to have my phone die on my way through.
Thank you, Ricki.
You're welcome. And I will try to call back in on another phone for the questions, unless people have questions right now.
Okay. Well, we actually have a couple of minutes. If anyone has a question, we can take one now, or we can listen to our next presenter and then take questions as well. Ricki, I wanted to thank you for really getting us a lot of information in a really tight time frame. I really encourage everyone to take a look at the resources that are available through the wiki and also through the links. You will have access to the PowerPoint presentations so that you can access those links directly. And then we also have a web page set up for the Parent Center Hub where you'll be able to access the information as well. So now I'd like to introduce Karen Erickson, and Karen is at the University of North Carolina. She comes to us, I think many of us have been very familiar with a lot of the work that Karen has done over the years, particularly around assessment and student outcomes. And Karen was a teacher of students with significant disabilities, and so she brings that experience to this work that may seem to somewhat technical, but she's really got the in the classroom working with students directly experience that makes it much more accessible for us as parents and also for the educators as well. So Karen, welcome, and you've pound 6 and you're ready to go.
Yeah. Is my phone on?
You're coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So the Dynamic Learning Maps Alternate Assessment Project is a consortium that now has 18 states in it. And our work, the group of us that are working together on this project actually met each other 4 years ago when the project was funded. So we've been running fast and working hard to figure out, can we really make this new way of thinking about alternate assessment work? And we're pretty excited with where we are and what we have found after the last, in the spring of 2014, we had multiple rounds of field testing. I'm sort of chuckling a little bit because Ricki and I both have Pennsylvania on the map. And so I think that Pennsylvania is now part of DLM, but they're still on Ricki's map. So Pennsylvania, we might need to help you figure that out, about which direction you're headed in. Part of what's been happening is that as we've been getting closer and closer to this operational year, there have been ongoing changes in state departments, and with those changes come different directions that people are taking. And so there's been some shifting over time. So I apologize if the error is on my side. The dynamic learning map sort of at the core of the whole thing, and as somebody who spent my career trying to figure out how do we effectively teach reading, writing, and communication to students who have the most complex disabilities, this map that's at the core of the DLM system is very, very exciting to me. So the team at Kansas is the team that came up with this concept. But they took the notion of learning progressions and of what many of us might think about as kind of a task analysis kind of approach, where we've thought about here's the grade level standard, and then we map backwards all of the core skills that are required to make your way up to that grade level standard. And what we now can do because of computer technology is we actually can get much more complex in our thinking about the ways that kids might be able to work toward or achieve a grade level target. And when we think about students who have the most complex needs, the really exciting thing is that we know that they're all going to come at this learning in different directions. And so this picture that you're seeing here is a tiny, faraway snapshot. We often talk about this as our Google Earth view of the learning map. And the idea here is just to help you have a sense of this map is comprised of about 10,000 of these little nodes. And the nodes come from primarily the research in mathematics and English language arts concept and skill development. And it started the map by mapping out all of the concepts and skills that are in college and career readiness from kindergarten through 12th grade. It then was added a huge swath of the map that's called the foundational nodes. And those foundational nodes are they're not specific math or specific ELA, English language arts concepts. They're communication skills, attending, joint attention, all of those really basic things that make it a whole lot easier to be a learner. If you have a way to communicate with other people, if you're able to attend jointly to information that's being shared, if you're able to interpret language, whether it's spoken language, signed language, or symbolic representations of language. So this map, instead of having single pathways that students follow as they make their way up to a grade level standard, it gives you the opportunity to think about how children might come at a particular standard from multiple directions. So the one specific example I often use as an English language arts person is there's a node in this map that represents the first grade skill of being able to code words that have a consonant, vowel, consonant, like cat. And the typical learning progression for kids to get to the place where they can decode a word like cat is first they'll learn to hear words and understand language, and then they start developing this thing we call phonological awareness, their ability to hear sounds in spoken language, which then gets down to phonemic awareness, or your ability to hear sounds within a single word. We're at that same point in the progression, we start looking at letter sound awareness, and as we get toward the ability to blend and segment sounds, like taking cat and knowing it's k-at, or having k-at and being able to blend it together to make cat, that's the place where we get to this EVC, consonant, vowel, consonant, word decoding. And that's the typical progression. But as parents who work with kids who have a range of special needs, you know that there are lots of children who, because they have a hearing impairment, because they can't use speech to communicate, for all kinds of other reasons, aren't going to make it to CVC decoding on that traditional learning progression. And what the learning map does is it allowed us to show the pathway that comes out of the research from children who are deaf before they learn to speak. And what we know from those children is they come to consonant, vowel, consonant decoding through pattern recognition. And so it allows them to get to that same grade level standard, but through a very different pathway of beginning to recognize spelling patterns within words and using those spelling patterns to be able to determine what that word is that they're looking at. So the point is that the map allows us, through the DLM assessment, to route children in different directions based on what we learn from their teachers about the nature of their abilities and disabilities. And so if you're a child who has a hearing impairment, you would come at this who actually not just a hearing impairment, a very significant hearing impairment, you would have the opportunity to route through this alternate pathway in order to get to CVC decoding. Within that big map, there are also these nodes that represent the dynamic learning map's essential elements. And they work a little bit like the core content connectors that Ricki just spoke about. And the difference is that the DLM essential elements line up almost one-for-one with each of the Common Core state standards. And so there's a much closer ratio between the number of essential elements and the number of standards that might be at any grade level. And that begins to change when you get into high school mathematics. But in general, we're talking about almost a one-to-one correspondence with a tight alignment. And the way that the essential elements work is they serve as this link that helps teachers and parents understand what is it that's most important for a student with significant cognitive disabilities to understand relative to the grade level standard that's there. And as Ricki said in her presentation, these Common Core connectors, or in DLM's case, the essential elements, serve as this really important starting place. And in the work that I've been doing with general education teachers, they've been particularly excited because they see these essential elements as really helpful supports of where they might start working toward a standard if they had a student who had a high incidence disability. So I think as parent centers, understanding the Common Core connectors or the essential elements, depending on which state you're in, actually serves a larger purpose than just the students who have the most significant cognitive disabilities who will take the alternate assessment, because I think they provide really important information about the essence or the core of what's being taught in a particular standard or group of standards. And that seems to be a really useful enlightenment for most people when their first take of the standard is, there's no way, I don't understand how my child could possibly be successful with that. Those essential elements are also in the map. And so when we are developing the assessment at any one grade level, so let's say it's the 4th grade assessment, we would find the Common Core state standard that links to the 4th grade target that we're teaching or assessing. We would find the essential element that links to that 4th grade target. And then we look in the whole area that's surrounding those two. And that becomes really important in development of the assessment. So the learning map is this big organizing scheme that is for the dynamic learning map. Because it's so massive and complex, we divided the learning map up into a series of claims and conceptual areas. And so the claims are big, large areas of the map that are related to what it is we think we're assessing, and then importantly, what it is we think that we're trying, the outcomes we're helping students achieve. So for example, the first claim in English language arts is that students will read text with increasingly complex comprehension. And that wording is really critical because we've always been very focused on the text getting harder and harder and harder, and haven't thought about the importance of the task that we're asking students to do. And in DLM, we sort of laid this claim that our goal is to help children learn and think in increasingly complex ways over time. And if that means that we have to minimize the complexity of the text, we're okay with that. So we'd rather have students be able to think about main ideas or make inferences with an easier text than be able to just remember some surface level facts or details from a more complex text. And so those claims help to organize this map. Within the claims, there are conceptual areas, which are just slightly more refined ways of thinking about how the nodes in the map relate to each other. And within those conceptual areas, you then have the essential elements, and the essential elements are the specific targets for teaching and testing within DLM. as we're looking for those essential element targets in the map, one of the unique things about DLM is that we then identify 5 linkage levels. And so we find that 4th grade level target, and then we find one node that's slightly above it, and that's the successor, because we're always trying to get students to move toward the next level of their abilities. But then we've broken down what comes before that target into 3 levels. The initial precursor are those real foundational skills. And one of the things that we're testing out through our, in the data that we collected this spring through the field test, is really being able to report growth, and especially to be able to report growth for those students who have the most complex multiple disabilities and oftentimes don't yet have intentional communication or symbolic communication. And those are students who oftentimes have been left out even within the alternate assessment, and who, more importantly, we haven't had great ways to measure their progress over time. Yet those of you who are parents of children or who know and care about families who have children with the most complex multiple disabilities, you know that there's reason for a big, huge celebration the day that they actually initiate a response or try to respond when someone asks them to do something. And that initial precursor level is going to allow us to capture some of that really early development that we typically don't think about or haven't had ways to capture within the context of academics. So that's, the 6-minute overview of this pretty in-depth system. And so I'm going to spend the rest of my time focused on the tools and resources that are available to you and for you to share with families that are really focused on how do you understand this system and how does it influence the kinds of decisions we make at the IEP meeting, the kinds of supports that families can provide both in and out of school, and the kind of instruction and assessment that's going to be coming forward for this group of students. So at the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies, where I am, we have the lead in creating the professional development system for DLM. Interestingly, when we first wrote the grant, the goal was that we would create about 6, was what our proposal was, 6 train-the-trainer modules. And after it was funded, that was about the same time that a bunch of research started coming out saying maybe we should be rethinking train-the-trainers. And when we met with our state partners to talk through our really early plans, they said, yeah, we're not doing train-the-trainers, and we think we need far more than 6. So we went back to the drawing board and created this pretty in-depth system of professional development. We have a series of modules. You'll see that 28 of these modules are currently available. It's a big difference between 6 and 28. And by the end of this calendar year, we should have all 50 of them done and up and going. We also are creating a system of instructional supports and materials that I'll share with you. And then there's a virtual community of practice, and that is an open virtual community of practice that's open to all interested stakeholders, including families, giving them ways to be able to seek, to get direct questions answered and to support each other in thinking about ways to help their children to be more successful. So the professional development modules are available in 3 different formats. One of them is the self-directed format, and these are on-demand, online, interactive modules. And so you go to a website, you log in. Some of the content is delivered through videos. You'll hear my voice quite often. And then there are activities that are built in throughout. And so we really worked hard to make sure that it wasn't just listening to a podcast or listening to a recorded webinar, but there were things that people had to do to think about how does what I'm learning apply, and really try to get a little bit more active engagement. So the self-directed modules were really designed to meet the needs of our very rural states. And so places like Alaska, Kansas, Iowa, North Dakota, that have large expanses of wide open space, and teachers just aren't going to be able to get together. Families aren't going to be able to be in the same room engaging in training. And so having these self-directed online, on-demand modules makes it possible that people can access them and take them anytime that they want to. Just this past week, we completed 60,000 of those modules completed. And so we're really excited that we've sort of gone over that 60,000 mark and hope that that just keeps growing and growing. Each of those modules is also available in a facilitated format. So it's the same content, but it's packaged in a way to support face-to-face delivery, but it doesn't require the trainer to develop content expertise. So there are videos that you access that you can download to view offline or you can view online. And you play the video to the group, and then there's a blue screen that says pause for the activity, and we've pre-planned and provided you with materials to be able to facilitate a small group interaction around the content that's being delivered. The self-directed modules are all targeted to be 30 to 45 minutes maximum, and the facilitated modules tend to be 45 to 60 minutes. And the difference is in the self-directed, you're engaging in independent thinking and working, and in the facilitated, it's group, and so it just takes a little bit more time. All of the materials that are a part of the facilitated or self-directed modules are also available as raw materials, and so we give you the raw Word files and PowerPoint files so that you can take those and pull from them as you need to and use them in ways that work best with your local interests, the people that you're working with, and what really is going to meet their needs. So we've tried to deal with different needs by offering these different formats, but then bottom line is you can take it and create what you need from it using the raw materials that we provide for you. Currently, there are modules that would give an overview of things like the Common Core State Standards and why they matter for this population of students. What are the DLM essential elements, how are they developed, and why are they important? Information about the claims in conceptual areas. And then a module that I think is particularly important about who are students with significant cognitive disabilities. I'm personally on a mission to make sure that we're doing a much better job of making sure that the right children are taking the alternate assessment. When we look at the statistics across the country, it appears that as many as 20% of the children who are taking alternate assessments do not have significant cognitive disabilities. They have significant academic learning problems that are not pervasive cognitive disabilities across their lives. And so we're really trying, rather than say, here are the rules for how you decide, we're trying to help people think more broadly about what does it mean to have a significant cognitive disability. There are then 4 modules that really focus on general instructional principles. So universal design for learning, and I think that that's a fairly unique take on the concept of universal design, because rather than focusing on technology, it really focuses on pedagogy and helps people think about the kind of shifts that teachers are going to have to make if children are going to be successful in being able to demonstrate college and career readiness skills. We really are going to have to rethink some of our traditions in teaching kids with significant disabilities if we're going to help all kids get there. There's a module on IEPs and writing sort of standards-based IEPs, but actually instead of the standards, they reference the essential elements. And then important modules around symbols, when and how they should be used, and around augmentative communication, specifically augmentative communication, and this population of students who may not yet have symbolic communication skills. Then there are 8 currently available modules that relate to English language arts, with 2 that are getting in their final review right now, so they'll be out before next week. And there are 11 in mathematics, with, again, 2 that are in their final review that will be ready by the end of next week. all of that content is done. It's available. It's out there. And as you have families who say things like, my school is saying my child has to do writing, but my child can't hold a pencil. They can't use a computer. How are they going to do this writing stuff? Knowing that there's this module on writing with alternate pencils that would give them some really good places to start and information about how to make that happen in about 30 minutes of effort, and that it's accessible right from the DLM website. Seems like each one of these modules would have meaning to different parents at different times. When you're accessing the DLM modules, you literally go to the dynamiclearningmaps.org website and click on Professional Development, and that will take you to this homepage. And you'll see that there are the online self-directed learning modules, the facilitated modules for groups on the bottom, and in the middle is a link to that virtual community of practice that we'll talk a little bit more about. So the online self-directed learning modules, you'll log in, you watch a short video, then you might do an activity. This one requires you to actually think and type in some information. The facilitated modules are the face-to-face training. The place where we're seeing them used really, really effectively is in professional learning communities. And so I can imagine those of you who are at parent centers where you have communities of parents who are working together, that doing things like having a bi-weekly brown bag lunch where you actually work together through one of these facilitated modules would allow you pretty quickly to work your way through these and to have some shared understanding and shared language about why and how this matters to the parents and families that you're serving and to yourselves. You access all of the content by downloading it online. The videos have closed captioning if that's required. Everything is in multiple formats in order to ensure its accessibility to people who might require screen readers or other kinds of technology. The virtual community of practice is the place where people will access materials. And by people, I mean educators, and I mean families. So all of the, in DLM and in English language arts, there's a large library of texts that have been released to the public that are these familiar texts that will be used in the assessment. And the idea is that we want to, for the students with the most complex multiple needs, we want to make sure that they're familiar with any book that they're going to be asked to do something with during the assessment. And so we have made those books available. They're accessed through the Tar Heel Reader Library, or families can download them as PDFs and print them out or read them online. And so those texts are going to be the very texts that children with the most complex needs would encounter on the assessment. But for students who are sort of in the high end of the alternate assessment range, reading these familiar texts is going to help them build some of the background and understanding that then allows them to be more successful when they get to the actual novel text, meaning new text that they'll encounter when they're actually taking the assessment itself. There are instructional supports on the virtual community practice, so sample lesson plans, lesson planning templates. And then there are these interactive groups, and you'll see if you go to the DLM virtual community of practice that there's a group for parents, caregivers, and other family members. And we really encourage people to post questions there. We moderate it here. If we don't know the answers, we have lots of friends, many of you are on the phone right now, who will reach out to in order to make sure that we're providing specific information about DLM that's useful to the family members who access that group. So you have, I think that as I finish up here, you're going to get directed to a website where there's a handout that gives you links to the modules, links to the virtual community of practice so that you can spend some time exploring those things. I also have prepared a list of all of the available modules and I highlighted, or I think I italicized the ones in the list that seem to me to sort of be the most critical for people who are going to be accessing the Dynamic Learning Maps alternate assessment within the foundational modules, ELA and mathematics, for people who are thinking, oh, this is a lot. How am I going to get started? You'll also see available to you is a brochure that was created that was written specifically for families to give them information about DLM and what it is. And then you also have access to this PowerPoint if you have an interest in having access to that. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. This information is really, I think, going to be very helpful for us, for parent centers and for parents. And we really appreciate your joining us and giving us such an excellent overview of all the resources that are available around the alternate assessment of dynamic learning maps. I really just want to say that all three of our presenters, Mary, Karen, and Ricki, have really given us some excellent information and access to resources that will really help us to work better and to be providing better information for our work one-on-one with families. I mean, I was listening and I could just envision all the ways that our center could use our state is a DLM state, but all the ways our center could use the materials one-on-one with families. Also, many of us are going to, over the course of this year, going to be looking at updating our training materials, our publications, our websites, because these assessments and the college and career readiness standards are, in many of our states, becoming operational during this school year or at various times during this school year. But also, this information is going to really help us in terms of our conversations with our state departments of education in terms of our systems advocacy efforts. And so I really appreciate that you guys have joined us today and are really helping us to take our programs and services at our parent centers to some new levels. So at this point, I'd really like to open up the forum for any questions that people might have, or if you have some additional information that you'd like to share, or any comments.
I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lisa. Yes.
I'm sorry, I have to butt in. I'm just astounded, really flabbergasted at the amount of materials both of your systems have developed. I mean, it is just really something to see how well thought out both are. Thank you.
This is Karen, and I think one of the things that we share, meaning all of the parent centers and then a researcher who's spent my career chasing down dollars to do work that I think is absolutely critical, that sometimes I have to convince other people is important. It has been so exciting to have all of this focus on a group of students who oftentimes have been marginalized in national and state policy. It just has been so exciting to have all of these resources and have the kinds of attention and support that have been given because of the efforts of the two consortia and all of the other work that has come along with it for other states that aren't a part of the two main consortia but have their own smaller consortia or their own alternate assessments that they're developing.
That's so true. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please press *6 or #6. They both work. Or you can post your question in the chat box.
Hi, this is Ricki. I just wanted to make a point that I don't think I made before, that I am also a parent of a 22-year-old son with Down syndrome. And when I look at all these materials, I really see the difference it would have made in his education and in my work as an advocate for him to have all this available. And I agree with Karen when she says one of the biggest things is having these core content connectors or the elements and be able to give a guide to educators as to, what are the key things that kids need over time, because I think one of the biggest problems they've had is they don't know how to look at the full-on curriculum and standards and say, okay, what are the things that we need to start with? Where do we need to prioritize at the beginning and get them in and participating with this content? And I'm just excited for the kids that are still that are going to have access to this.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, to have this kind of information as a parent, to be able to really know what are the possibilities in terms of instruction, it is really a phenomenal achievement. It's really phenomenal. And
this is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
No, I didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what's really amazing, too, and my daughter's older than Ricki's, but if you look at from 1997 when we first started having this access to how the conversation has shifted now, there were some high expectations, but I'm not sure anybody realized it would go to this point. And so I'm just amazed, and like Ricki was like, it would have made such a difference in my daughter's life, but look at the difference it's making now. And I mean, at the first, I remember our first conversation saying, or thinking that, for the first time, a lot of students who'd never had books before were having books, or teachers were considering books in classrooms for students with significant cognitive disabilities. But look at the energy and the emphasis that's being placed on even doing the assessment, which ties back to the instruction, and it's just amazing. So,
and I think that it's so important to get the word out there, and I'm so glad you're doing this webinar because I just did a presentation for 120 parents from 26 states, and they're not really hearing about all this necessarily in their state. So getting that information out there through your center is so important.
That is so true. I see in the box that Miriam made a comment/question about the 20% and how it's really a shame that 20% of the students who are taking alternate assessments don't have significant disabilities. And Karen noted that it varies from state to state, and it is as high as 20% in some states. Karen, is there some place that we might be able to access that data and share it in terms of what you guys have seen from state to state?
I will certainly do some looking and see where that might be published. There have been a couple of different looks at that, and I've seen it talked about at OSEF conferences, and then data that we haven't yet published through DLM clearly confirms it. And so I will find that out and make sure that I forward it on to you so that you can share it with the network.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think if the more of us who know what's happening in our own state, the more of us can really have some conversations with our state departments about it.
And in that document, I was talking about where we have the discussion points and the research. There's a lot of information. NCSEC had an 18-state survey about really who these kids are and where are they being educated, and a whole lot of other information that can be really helpful to you all. I also wanted to point out that I typed, but I don't know how many people saw or not, that I did confirm while we're on the conference that Pennsylvania is doing the Pilot 2 assessment for NCSEC, so they must still be in NCSEC. I don't know if they can be in both, if that's possible, but I do know they're in NCSEC.
I know I talked to the folks at Peel, and there seems to be a lot of discussions going on in Pennsylvania. That's all that they were able to say.
Yeah, so there might be, they might be participating in our Pilot 2, but there may be thoughts about doing DLM. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but as of now, they are still participating in the Pilot 2 assessment for NCSEC.
Are there states who are trying to do both? I mean, I guess there are some states who didn't show up on either map, and they're putting something together in order to meet their, in order to meet the federal requirements, especially if they have a ESEA waiver.
I don't think there are states doing both generally, but I think there has been movement, between them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I also wanted to point out from your role as parent centers that in the ESEA flexibility requests that almost all the states have, their waivers, most of the states that are in one of these two consortia would say in there, when it was asked how are we going to get kids with disabilities to the state standards, they would say in there, well, for kids in the alternate assessment, we're part of DLM or we're part of NCSIC. And so one of the questions to ask in your state is, are they implementing this? What are they doing? They said they were going to do this in their waiver. So, those are one of the things to look at, what they said in their waiver about this, and are they doing, what they said they were doing. So.
Mm-hmm. And what are their timelines?
Right.
I think many have been very clear about what those timelines are.
Because as you can see, there's a lot of resources from both consortia, and you don't want, from a parent perspective now I'm speaking, you don't want them to first be implementing all this instructional materials and modules and, 2 months before the assessment, and then say,
right.
Oh, these kids can't do well on the assessment. See, we told you. You want them to be preparing the kids so that it's a fair assessment, and it's not just used to say, oh, these are too hard, or we knew these kids couldn't do it. So really, are they now, already working on getting this information out there to teachers so that students have a fair shot at demonstrating what they know on these assessments?
Mm-hmm. And both of your assessments include some formative measures?
Yes, NCSIC has formative assessments. I think Karen can speak for herself, but I believe they certainly do.
DLM actually has two formats, and about half of our states are participating in the year-end only assessment, and the other half of the states are participating in what's called the instructionally embedded assessment. And even the year-end only states can have access to the DLM system across the year. And the plan is that educators will have the option of using the DLM system with students as frequently as once a week if they choose. And because of that map and the dynamic routing through the nodes, it will actually, the results of students' assessments, the more often teachers use it, will actually serve to guide instruction in next steps in where they go. And so that's a pretty exciting, most teachers, rather than thinking, oh no, I have another thing to do, are actually pretty excited to think that they're going to have access to an assessment system that gives them what I call actionable data. So not just they got it right, they got it wrong, but information that helps them think about what they can do next week that would be new and different from what they did this week.
That's excellent. That is so good. So,
crazy that we're excited about a test.
Well, I think it's hard because neither one just completely did a test.
Right.
Providing the supports for educators, which has been missing, so that students can learn and do well.
That's so true. Still asking if there are any questions. Lisa, did you want to go to the next part?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, if we haven't totally exhausted everyone, especially the presenters, because that was an incredible amount of wonderful information, we just wanted to say that at the address you see on the page, you can access the materials from this webinar. Soon we'll have the recording up as well, so you can listen to it again, or if you didn't get a chance to listen, you can share it with others and download the handouts and connect directly with both of the systems and all of those wonderful materials we've been hearing about. it makes me want to change what I'm doing for a living. It sounds like it was such a challenge and really fascinating. If you received the reminder about this webinar, it will also have this URL in it. So you don't need to write it down if you got that. And then finally, I guess, in addition to our immense thank yous, we are going to have another webinar in a month, but we need your input to determine what the topic will be. So I didn't ask Deborah if I could put her email address there, but please do weigh in, because you know what you need or what you'd like to find out more about, and we're listening. So please do email us and let us know what would be most helpful to you. And finally is this little mini survey, just a few questions. You can see it in the chat box. All you need to do is click on that link and answer 2 or 3 questions about how helpful you found this webinar and what you might need from the SIPR as a follow-up to really help you serve families of children with disabilities. That's it, Deborah. Except for that, I am really super impressed with the work that's been done with both of these assessment systems. It's just phenomenal.
I totally agree, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how we as parent centers can help to support this. I mean, I like to think of it as a movement, how we can help to support this movement to make sure that families of students with significant cognitive disabilities are informed about these assessments and also are really using those resources to ensure that their students are receiving the instruction and access to instruction that is going to help them to improve their I like the way Ricki says it, college, career, and community readiness. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And today is the first day of school in many places here, and so I imagine that there were some extra efforts on each of your parts to participate, and we really do appreciate them. And as Lisa said, we are looking forward to your suggestions and comments for our webinars going forward, and also for the kinds of tools and resources that can help you to implement this information that you gained today in your states and your center. Thank you, everybody. Yes, hello.
Oh, I think someone's saying hello.
Yes. Speak up. Don't be shy. Oh, well. You can write it in the chat box.
Okay. I think that's it.
All right.